great pleasure today to respond to the toast. However, as Churchill once said, there's nothing more difficult than responding to a toast, except perhaps climbing a wall leaning towards you, or trying to kiss a girl leaning away. On behalf of the guests from the Blackburn Vale Trust, Eastbourne High School alumni, again, no old girls, and the Cambridge and Oxford 50th anniversary, I too am a member of the Cambridge and Oxford Old Society, thanks to Rex Shaw inviting me to the function in, I think, 1969, when I had just been promoted to a sub-lieutenant in the Royal Navy. I duly attended the dinner at Pembroke College, dressed in full dinner uniform. And as we walked across the quadrangle to dinner, there were multiple students bedraggled, dirty, unkempt, long-haired, disheveled, in quite a disgrace at the time. They really were. But when I look around the room now at Cambridge and Oxford grammarians, they didn't turn out too badly at all. So well done on the restoration. Congratulations. You're absolutely right. Also, on this day in 1859, I think that was before you guys were there, Charles Darwin published the first of The Origin of the Species, in which he postulated that any organism, I have to be really careful with that word, any organism with superior qualities would eventually rise and be dominant. And from my position across the pond, I see some semblance of the grammarians and the grammar schools making a rise as we go into the future. And I'll leave your own conclusions to why that makes us a superior species. Slightly more formally, I'd like to recognise absent friends, Bill Honey, George Dixon, and Dennis Mims, and one more. Most of us in this room at some point were touched or influenced by Rex Shaw. The call to report to the headmaster's office was never a welcome call, and it happened a couple of times to me, and I think Nick McKean, you were equally guilty over there. But if Rex is looking down, he's there with his beady eyes, and he's looking sideways at you, and he's got the merest hint of a smile on his face. And you might get a, not bad. Just like he did when we beat Lewis at rugby twice in one season, we got a not bad. But he's looking at us with that faint smile, saying, not bad. I'd like to thank the committee again for putting on such a splendid evening, and also if any of the Hydro staff are still here, thank you for the excellent service and excellent catering. Well done indeed. As we focus on our affiliations with the high school, I'd like to tell you, I think it's a true story. I believe it's a true story. There was as someone indicated, in the late 60s, a number of high school girls were invited to participate in some of the more erudite physics and maths, pure math. I didn't even know what they meant, but anyway, they were invited to participate in the school. So in my last year, we had a number of high school girls who participated. Well, one of these high school girls, now fairly well preserved and presented, was going to a dentist in Old Town, I think, and she was rising in the 50s, getting close to 60, and she saw the diploma on the wall of this dentist. And it was exactly the same name as a grammar school boy with whom she had a particular shine for, and really thought he was the best thing ever. And she thought to herself, could this be the same man I knew and wanted to know better at the grammar school? So when she went into the surgery, she realised it must be a mistake, because sitting ahead of her was a balding, fat, ugly individual with lots of nose hair. And for those of us getting a little older, the nose hair is always a problem. But at the end of the appointment, she plucked up her courage and she said, did you ever go to the grammar school? To which he replied, yes, I did. And she asked, what did you study? And he said, well, pure math, applied math, and physics. And she said, you were in my class. And then this old, ugly man with nose hair leaned in closer and said, what did you teach? With that, I'm done, and I'm going to sit over there with my buddies in the corner. If my harm is ready. No? Okay, all right. With that, I'm done. Thank you, everybody. Thank you from the guests. We had a splendid evening. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Laidler is very lucky to be here. In 1955, while on a character-forming outward bound course, he suddenly became downward bound, falling 40 feet out of an oak tree and bouncing off the branches during his unscheduled descent. Mike doesn't remember hitting the ground, nor the first 3 weeks of a 4-month stay in hospital while he was patched up. Indeed, not only is he lucky to be here, folks, he's lucky to be anywhere. But Mike's never-say-die attitude to life helped him back to school and onto the football field earlier than ever expected. But the medicos couldn't straighten him out completely, and he was hampered by a right wrist, which he'll probably show you in a minute, which healed some way off straight, and meant that he had to hold his quirky bent-nibbed fountain pen at an awkward angle, and his CCF viewing oddly at his lips and on his hip. His bone-shattering experience didn't dissuade him from climbing as he set off up the diplomatic ladder. Mike began his distinguished career when he joined the Foreign and Commonwealth Office after Eastbourne Grammar School. He rose smoothly through the secretarial ranks, that's not the typist and shorthand, but the secretarial ranks in the diplomatic service. Third Secretary in Senegal, Vice Consul in Cambodia before being seconded to Brussels as the first Secretary in Britain's delegation to NATO. After further high-ranking jobs, our intrepid climber packed his Ferrero Rocher chocolates when he set off on his latest challenge, European Ambassador to the South Pacific, where he was given a few tips on cheating at golf by the Prime Minister of Fiji. After 5 warm years, he was appointed successively to his most demanding 2 roles. 4-year stints, first as European Ambassador to Zimbabwe, and then in South Africa. There, over 4 very fascinating years, he had regular and friendly contact with none other than, you might guess, Nelson Mandela. Mike has serious views on grammar schools and a fund of stories of derring-do at the top of the diplomatic tree. There is none better to stimulate and entertain us, ladies and gentlemen. I'll give you Mike Laidler, OBE. Mike was at school from 51 to 58. He will test grammarians and grammar schools. Mike, now, we're all ears.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Howard. Is this on? I have to hold it closer.
Loud and clear.
Fine? Okay. It's really an honour and a privilege to have been asked to come here tonight to say a few words, although extremely frightening. I think it's one thing to make speeches in a professional capacity, in my case mostly to a lot of foreign Johnnies, but quite another to face a gathering of peers, some of whom knew you when you started at the grammar school, a nipper in short trousers, scared to death of the prefects, scared to death of the masters, and the whole overwhelming experience. For instance, it's only in this gathering that I would be known forever, I think, the rest of my life as the boy who fell out of the tree and played a lopsided bugle. The other day, I came across a saying of Will Rogers. He said, "The schools ain't what they used to be, and never was." As grammarians, you may well not applaud the purity of language, but I dare say many of you will go along with the sentiment. But beware. The last three words are the most significant ones. Every generation considers that his predecessor has to some extent gone to pot and betrayed its standards and achievements. Certainly there have been massive changes since most of us went to school. Many of them have more to do with the zeitgeist and political ideology than educational methods. Charges of elitism and unfair early triage were laid at the door of the grammar school system, and in particular the 11th class exam, and in the end, the comprehensive school replaced them. This is not the time or place to dwell on that debate, but I will just say that in my view, the grammar school's demise closed a pathway that had allowed many of us to overcome lack of wealth, privilege, and in many cases, intellectual and social stimulus. I am certainly not going to fall into the trap of saying that things are worse now than they were. However, I will take some convincing that the comprehensive school system has narrowed the gap between the levels of education of state and fee-paying schools. It's true that the grammar school was not egalitarian in nature. It was most definitely meritocratic. I think that's the word. Elitism, or as I prefer to call it, excellence, was nurtured. So there's a long list of people who have made their mark in the spheres of academia, science, medicine, the military, civil service, journalism, the church, and so forth, and many of them are here tonight. Our school gave these men, in the absence of wealth, perhaps their only opportunity to flower. But there are thousands of men and women from grammar schools all over the country who have been productive and happy in perhaps less spectacular walks of life that would otherwise have been closed to them. I don't recall anybody ever telling me that they regretted their days at our school. I certainly haven't heard anybody say they would have rather gone to a comprehensive. What I am saying, however, is that our school was good. And what made it good, what made it better was that it was free. But what made it so good? Obviously, and it's been said already this evening, the most important factor was the teaching staff. Most of them had survived at least one terrible war and knew the meaning of discipline and valued the role of education in the rebuilding of our society. They tempered that discipline with a real concern to find the merit in every boy. In today's parlance, we'd say they went the extra mile. Next page. This is a bit long, it's Howard's fault. Discipline was in general not a problem. There were some exceptions where the inherent evil that lies in every schoolboy found the chink in a master's armour. I think some of us know who we all mean. But our classes were mostly ordered, if not necessarily serene. I remember the methods of our English master, Bill Platt. He would teach us a rule and ask us if we understood it. If subsequently that rule of language was broken, he'd say either we had lied about understanding it, a definite no-no, or we had set out to offend him, which was even worse, or we were thick and should be in another educational establishment. Not very PC, but very effective. So even today, when I hear those who should know better confuse the verbs to lie and to lay, mix up should and would, and misuse expressions such as to beg the question when they really mean ask the when they think it means ask the question when it really means to avoid the question. I long for Bill's long, bony fingers to rifle a small but painful piece of chalk behind the perpetrator's ears. Languages were also taught with surprisingly good results. Despite his feigned bewilderment as to the origins of his nickname, together with his predilection for exhaustive narratives of the Narvik campaign, Mr. Bonfield instilled into us the basics of French, although perhaps not the accent. When I first entered the Francophone world, it all fell into place remarkably easily. But my favourite memory of Colonel Bonfield, who commanded the CCF, was his instinctive dive for the dirt and his cry of "Take cover!" when some likely lads, no names, no pack drill, loosed off a live 303 round above his head on a CCF outing. An inverted sense of respect which let all hell loose. Joe Mallion's teaching methods in German were modern and enlightened with a marvellous touch of humour. For example, I shall never forget the way in which he forestalled schoolboy sniggering and ribaldry when we first encountered the German word for father. The headmaster during my time was Rex Shaw, a stern figure whose unfair nickname reflected his somewhat haughty demeanour, but who on the death of my father revealed a tenderness and compassion which still affects me with emotion today. He filled me with another emotion, however, when he tried to convey to me the principle of moments about the fulcrum. Maths and science were pretty much a closed book to me, and the feeling of sheer terror and bewilderment after his lesson on that subject leaves me even today in a cold sweat at the word fulcrum. History and geography were a pleasure though, and Mr. Harrison's sixth form history seminars made us feel grown up. The debates with other pupils on your essays were way ahead of their time. I could go on, and I'm sure all of you could. Messrs. Dyer, who failed through no fault of his own to teach me algebra. Mr. Ward, who opened the door to a lifetime of musical enchantment. Owen, who must have been the inspiration for the Latin lesson in the film Life of Brian. And Bob Madden, who showed us that with a bit of effort we could tackle almost anything you set your mind to. Each in his own way shaped our futures. Aside from the academics, there was sport and the CCF. How many boys of 14 today get to play sport at least twice a week, can shine a pair of army boots, press thick khaki trousers, play a bugle or drum, however crookedly, fire a heavy rifle and operate a field radio? This is actually a rhetorical question. But over and above that, and I think it's already been said this evening, the school taught us, by a process of subconscious absorption rather than deliberate policy, a kind of self-confidence and respect for, but not fear of, authority. It also, perhaps over-idealistically, gave us the impression that truthfulness and honesty, a sense of fair play, were what would best get us through life. I certainly felt all that when I left school, and that I had been given the best academic tools possible, and some practical skills. Well, how did all that serve us in real life? I feel sure that each of you has his own answer. In my own case, I'd have to say that this schoolboy respect for authority was the first casualty. It didn't take me long to twig that those in authority were not infallible, and in many cases were even dishonest, especially if they were politicians. When I was a young lad, young secretary in Africa, one of my jobs was to take a Land Rover with a film unit out to the benighted peoples of Africa to show them how things worked in the UK. Most of these chaps lived in mud huts or under tents made from camel skin. And so films about the but free school milk in England slightly went over their heads. But I remember, but they did like football. Before I went on one of these trips to Mauritania, my first trip to Mauritania, a very senior secretary in the Foreign Office was supposed to give me lessons on how to behave in the desert with the Mauritanians. One of the things he told me was that it was obligatory to burp after every meal. It only took me about 2 or 3 days to realise that I was in fact the only one doing this. I asked this very elegant Moor, dressed in a beautiful white boo-boo, what the score was. He replied to me, "Eh bien, monsieur, nous autres, nous pouvons nous en passer. Mais si cela rentre dans vos mœurs, on comprendrait parfaitement." I translate, because I didn't get the laugh I hoped it would. He said, "Sir, we can manage without it. But if it's part of your manners, we would perfectly well understand." This did shake my faith in authority figures and senior people. Howard had already referred to my golfing exploits with Ratu Mara, who was the Prime Minister of Fiji. Once I was playing golf with him, and my ball, as usual, ended up in an unplayable situation right at the bottom of a palm tree. So I asked him, probably rhetorically, "What should I do about this Prime Minister?" To which he replied, "Leather wedge, Mike, leather wedge." I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but it soon twigged that it was your shoe. You were to kick it. So I said, "But what if they see me?" He said, "They might see you, but you're with me. They won't say anything." On the same golf course, there was a minister of the Fiji government who always hooked his ball into the bundu, but whose caddy always found it on the fairway. He had supplied the said caddy with a number of balls marked identically, who strategically stood on the fairway and placed them. He was the Minister of Justice. I also quickly learned that the English language, as taught by Bill Platt, did not reign supreme in the real world, and it could be misleading and sometimes funny. When I first joined the Commission, I was seconded by the Foreign Office of the Commission. My boss was a German, fat German, who'd served in the Second World War. He asked me into his office and sat me down and said, "Now, I wish to interrogate you about your past." I thought of arc lights and my hands being manacled to the back of the chair, but I was somewhat reassured as later in the conversation he said, "Yes, I have interrogated myself about this question." I'm afraid I couldn't resist saying, "Did you talk?" This actually went way over his head. Some of you may have seen this one too, but I also was once at a conference in Vienna, staying in a hotel which was advertising another hotel, in which it said, "Charming French widows in every room, with beautiful aspects." Another thing the school didn't cover, and perhaps couldn't be expected to, was the art and science of dealing with copious amounts of virtually free booze associated with the diplomatic life. It took several salutary lessons before I could establish a mutually beneficial working arrangement with alcohol. A couple of them were, I went by ship to my first posting in West Africa, and on that ship were a bunch of French army officers who had a penchant for brandy and soda and poker. A combination which I shall never forget, in that I arrived in Dakar broke and virtually unconscious. I also had the good fortune to play soccer in Senegal, strangely enough with the Railway Workers' Union team. On one Sunday morning, after a fairly heavy night out, I was on the wing, the ball came to me, I dribbled magnificently, slotted the ball into the goal. Nobody else on the pitch had moved. The referee came up to me and said, "Excuse me, sir, you're kicking the other way." But that's not the funny part. The funny part is that he had a kind of verbal whip round with everybody on the pitch. Came up to me and said, "Monsieur, I've had a word with everybody. We'll start again." True African hospitality. Some of my colleagues, however, never really managed to come to terms with the demon drink. I was once in consul in Hamburg for a little while, and my boss went to visit a submarine. I'm assured by Martin that it wasn't nuclear. And one of the jobs that the consular officer has to do is to go on to visiting naval ships, and this ship called HMS Alliance in Hamburg. He had a couple of drinks, and he was supposed to doff his hat to the white ensign. Unfortunately, a swirl of wind took his hat and blew it into the Ulster, a muddy, oily harbour. He missed his footing and fell in, whereupon a young submariner in impeccable white polo neck collar dived in, picked him up, to a ripple of applause from the Germans standing there. One thing I think we did pick up at school was a sense of humour. It's said, mostly by the British, that the sense of humour is well developed and special. I think I share that view. Sometimes it's pretty laconic though. I remember an American officer at NATO coming to give us a pep talk about something the Americans had invented, mostly British officers in the audience. And in order to, I suppose, to ingratiate himself with us, he said, "You know, I'm American, but I do actually have a lot of European blood. I know, for example, that I have some Scandinavian blood, I know I have some Greek blood, and I think I have some Irish blood." Whereupon a laconic voice from the back of the room said, "I say, sir, your mother must have been a sporting lady." I think that laconic humour is the best. Recently I met a chap from the Outer Hebrides in Stornoway. So I said to him, "What is life like in Stornoway?" He said, "In Stornoway there's fornicating and there's fishing. But in the winter there's no fishing." Foreigners can also be quite funny, surprisingly enough. I was once in Barbados at a conference where they were trying to establish where to establish the Caribbean Development Bank. The Jamaicans wanted it and the Barbadians wanted it. The Jamaicans had said the Barbados post office will never cope with the extra load. So the Prime Minister of Barbados, a man called Errol Barrow, stood up and told the following story. He said, at Christmas one time, the Barbados post office received a letter addressed to God. They opened it, and the letter said, "I'm a widower with 5 children. Christmas is coming. I have no money. God, would you please send me $100? The chap at the post office thought this was extremely touching, had a whip round, found $50, sent it back to the return address. A little after Christmas, another letter came addressed to God, in which it said, "Dear God, thank you so much for sending me $100, but would you please bring down a fearful chastisement upon those bastards at the Barbados post office who paid $50. Howard Spencer, who, as you know, is a PR guru and therefore has his finger on the pulse of the nation's obsessions with celebs, suggested that I should do a bit of name dropping, so it's his fault. Here goes. On the positive side, I have shaken the Queen's hand 3 times, debated and broken bed with bread. With Nelson Mandela. Played golf with P.W. de Klerk and Matumara, not at the same time. Become quite a close confidant of Prince Sihanouk. Drunk gin and tonic all night with the King of Tonga in his wilder youth. He rather worryingly died just recently, at a very young age. And exchanged pleasantries with the Crown Prince of Denmark. On the downside, I have been kissed by Yasser Arafat and hugged by Robert Mugabe. Weirdly enough, my while sitting next to and chatting with Harry Belafonte, the president in Becky's inauguration, and spending a charming evening with Harry Seacombe, for whom I acted as an interpreter at one of Harold Wilson's celebrity bashes. Well, you may be saying, what's the point of all this boasting? Well, it's simply this. If I had not passed the 11+ exam, none of these personalities would have had the benefit of making my acquaintance. I have heard that an after-dinner speech should be like a woman's skirt. Yes. Long enough to cover the essential and short enough to be interesting. With that in mind, I hope you do not think I have been too long. Thank you. I've also been asked to propose another toast, and that is to the Eastbourne Grammar School, whose legacy remains with us all, whether we recognise it or not, and in particular to all members of the staff, and some of those are here with us tonight, welcome to you, without whose devotion and skills we should have all been the poorer. Please rise if you're able to drink to the school and the masters.